From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. And today's lineup includes K-State's Dan O'Brien, as Dan goes over the list of leading customers for U.S. grains currently, saying that those deserve to be monitored carefully as our grain prices remain bogged down. Dan will also look ahead to next week's USDA grain supply and demand report. Further ahead, K-State's Ignacio Ciampitti will walk through a simple means of estimating corn yields at this point of crop development. He'll tell how to take those ear and kernel counts to come up with a yield projection for a given field. And standing by to talk Kansas agricultural weather with us, as always, K-State's Mary Knapp. All this and more coming your way next on Agriculture Today.
Make hand washing a healthy habit everywhere you go. Wash your hands with soap and water for at least 20 seconds, especially after going to the bathroom, before, during, and after preparing food, and before eating. If soap and water aren't available, use a hand sanitizer that has at least 60% alcohol. Life is better with clean hands. A message from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
You're tuned in to the K-State Radio Network. Glad to have you aboard for another Agriculture Today. We'll pick up on the grain markets now with Dan O'Brien along from his office in Colby, Northwest Kansas. As you know, Dan is K-State Research and Extension's grain market economist. Well, Dan, one might presume, given the sluggishness going on, that this has become something of a weather market and the expectations are out there for a healthy fall harvest.
A weather market on the downside. Yeah, when we see Dees corn closing yesterday at 323, 324 thereabouts, November beans at 878, September lead contract, hard red winter wheat at 417, down considerably from where it had been of late, even though there are concerns about again, some spotty west, central, and southern plains areas where they didn't catch rain. A good chunk of Iowa that looks pretty dry. Issues back still in parts of Indiana and Ohio. Although we have those challenges, still the market at this time has a pretty obvious consensus that we're on our way to strong crops. I'd seen one independent analytical firm come up with a public number of about 15 billion bushels. So generally the consensus is that we'll have good to great yields in most areas. And is that in the bank? Well, of course it's not. There can be surprises, developmental issues on the crops that don't come along as positively as we thought. But really the safe bet now, apparently it's a consensus issue, is that the market feels comfortable at 323 Dees corn, 878 soybeans. So there are some notable things that are not in there. And one of them, if we have time to talk about today, would be the disruption that has happened and could happen to even a greater degree in China, given flooding that has happened and the risk of some catastrophic events even beyond where they've been. That's out there to be looked at. To me, it's surprising how the markets are not paying that much attention to a very low U.S. dollar. And that has a lot to do, not everything, but a fair amount to do with the strong exports we've been seeing. So I guess in trying to piece this together in my own thoughts, here we have low prices, great buying opportunity for a number of buyers, and we've seen some decent exports across the board. The U.S. dollar is not a headwind, it's a tailwind on any of that happening. But yet the markets right now, given what they see, are showing pessimism, if nothing else. Should also mention that we do have a USDA report coming up. I believe it's on Wednesday of next week. Mm-hmm. It's always good to look and see or try to guesstimate what numbers might be weak in those supply-demand balance sheets. It looks like the corn export number, this for old crop, again, representing what projections will happen on August 31st, the end of the old crop marketing year. 1.725 billion bushels right now, sales and shipments, 1.775. So it does look like we might be about 50 million bushels short on that. So that would be some weakness on that old crop balance sheet. The new crop sales that have come in from China have been showing up, and a lot of them in that new crop side. And gee whiz, we're projecting 2.05 billion bushels of sales, and we've got 505 million bushels on the books as pre-purchases. And again, a lot of that from China in response to all this flooding. So that's out there. For as strong as we've been on the grain sorghum export side of late, and are thankful for that, it does look like grain sorghum numbers are probably going to come in at somewhere around 170 million bushels of exports. The USDA is projecting for this marketing year ending August 31st of 210 million bushels. So that number will probably grow smaller in the old crop balance sheet, and the stocks will grow a little higher, and there'll be some weakness. But as long as exports on a weekly basis stay strong, just keep going. I think the market is pretty positive, and basis levels still reflect that in Kansas. Again, when we see 311 September, 323 D's corn futures, farmers' pessimism is being stoked right now, but there's some underlying risk to this market that can still bring surprises and eventually bring some positive.
So, Dan, we're anticipating hefty supplies out of this harvest upcoming, and we see some of these fits and starts as far as exports, but the onus is on the export side. China captures, of course, the lion's share of attention, but in addition to China, what are the markets to watch here? What are the potential customers that could help lift prices out of this?
Well, let's start with looking at corn and grain sorghum. It's interesting that total, and we're talking in terms of million metric tons for this right now. That's what the USDA reports are. Total accumulated exports, actual shipments so far about 38.7 million metric tons of U.S. corn for this marketing year. That's down from about 47 million metric tons a year ago. So that's a negative. That's a weakness. But of that 39 million metric ton that we have so far shipped, Japan, just under 9 million metric tons out of all that. Mexico, 13. So Japan, Mexico, 1, 2, the big players. Colombia, 4.3, comes in pretty strong. Korea, South Korea, 2.5. China, with the noise that it's had in the market and sizable purchases, 856,000 metric tons. So China is kind of a wild card that affects the psyche of the market, but the big players that are really pushing things are Mexico, Japan, Colombia, Guatemala's been pretty strong, and Korea. So we're sure glad for what China has done, but it's interesting how much impact the rumors from China come in. So if there's to be a major move, then China gets to 1 million metric tons, and then you're moving on to 1.5 and 2, and that makes a difference. Interesting for grain sorghum, 3.8 million metric tons actually shipped in this marketing year, and out of that, 3.2 have come from business with China. Really, the only other player there at about 210 of size. Only other players are again Japan and Mexico. Japan at 210,000 metric tons, and Mexico at 277,000 metric tons. So big issues at hand. If we have time, Eric, I can mention on soybeans and wheat if you'd like.
Yeah, by all means.
Okay. When you look at soybean exports, 39, just under 40 million metric tons shipped this year. And out of that, the big players are, for this year, China, 13.5. So 13.5 out of 40. So yeah, that's a big deal. Well, about 30%. Other players coming in. You see kind of combination of Germany at 1.1, Netherlands 1.1, Spain at 1.2, Taiwan 1.6, Japan 2.1 million metric tons, Thailand 1.1, Egypt 3.6, Mexico at 4.2 again. So Mexico coming in second, Mexico and Japan being sizable, and a lot of other players all in play. Just finish up with hard red winter wheat, 2.07 million metric tons. And out of that, the big players are, for that this year for hard red, China at 408,000 metric tons, coming in pretty strong. Indonesia, 239. Mexico at 314. So for hard red winter wheat this year, China is number one, export customers so far. So the reports I hear that we hear for market news more so are corn and grain sorghum and soybeans. But given the main wheat grow here in Kansas, China is leading the way for hard red winter wheat. So that's a big thing.
I want to finish up by letting folks know, Dan, that you will be bringing these points and many others up in your presentation at the Virtual Risk and Profit Conference that K-State will host next week. And this is being strung out throughout the week, but you're up to bat on Thursday, if memory serves.
Thursday and Friday. On Thursday, Glenn Tonser starts off that session talking about livestock. I follow up talking about grains, and then we're there together to address issues. So given all that's happening in the world and the level of prices, I think that interplay between crops and livestock would be a big thing, particularly when we talk about feed usage. And then on the next day, Guy Allen and myself will come in and really try to focus on international factors. I don't doubt this discussion of China will come into play, but we'll also be looking at South American supplies and all the politics and disease issues and exchange rates and whatever else is happening in South America that seems to always hold promise to really be promising for the U.S., but so far hasn't led to major shortfalls in supply. And that's right now, as you look at China with its demand pull, South America with its alternative supplies, we haven't had the combination of those yet to really drive prices up in the soybean markets in particular.
Well, you are never at a lack for subject matter, and in a few moments later on in the broadcast, we'll talk more about the Risk and Profit Conference, the format, and how producers can take that and other sessions of it in. Dan, much obliged for your time, as always.
Great. Thank you, Eric.
Dan O'Brien is a grain market economist with K-State Research and Extension. He's along with us right here every Friday to offer up his observations on the grain market trends. In a moment, sampling your corn stands to come up with an estimate on yields. Our next guest will cover that here on Agriculture Today.
With the shortage of primary care physicians, especially in rural areas, health education and disease prevention are vital. K-State Research and Extension programs address quality of life, personal development, and health behaviors across all life stages of all social economic groups. To learn more about health education, one of K-State Research and Extension's 5 grand challenges, visit www.ksre.ksu.edu.
We're back now on Agriculture Today. Well, the corn crop in Kansas, according to the latest statistics, is doing well in most parts of the state, and we'll visit about that. And moreover, methods for estimating corn yields as we head into the latter part of the production season soon now. Joining us via phone from the road in western Kansas, Ignacio Ciampitti, crop production and cropping systems specialist with K-State Research and Extension. And wanted to tap you for your observations, Ignacio, on corn as you've traveled around the state in recent days. The USDA says that 61% of our crop in the state is rated good to excellent as of this past weekend. So are you seeing confirmation of that out there?
Yeah, as always, Eric, thanks for the invitation.
Sure.
And I would say yes. On average, it looks really good. We have a few spots, I would say northeast specifically, and some sections on the central part and southwest that probably are an exemption to that rule. But if you look at northwest, that area looks excellent. So, I mean, driving through I-70 and you look at all the how green everything looks like. I mean, all the way from the border from Colorado all the way to central Kansas. It's very nice to see that most of that corn in that area is already passing flowering or already into what we call the grain filling, which is usually around 2 or 3 weeks after flowering. So in terms of final kernel number, we can discuss in 1 minute. Then we have, if you say, probably the north-central portion of the state, and then also I would say to the northeast that we are already are getting close to the milk stage. Temperatures at this point, the lower temperatures that we're experiencing these weeks is helping to extend that filling. For that crop that is getting closer to harvest is excellent. Overall, across the state, with a few exceptions, I think that we will have a good growing season at the end.
Right. What we want to focus on right here, though, is a way of estimating corn yields at this stage, still far enough away from harvest that some things have to be assumed here. But there is a basic formula that you suggest producers could utilize for this estimation, Ignacio.
Yeah, you probably have heard me saying this a couple of times. It's just an excuse to many situations to get out and to, at this point, to scout, looking for potential problems on insects and disease. So when you go out and you start doing estimating your corn yield potential, I think that you have a chance to try to get a fair assessment of how the crop is looking at this point and make sure that if you look for something that looks odd, consult with an agronomist and take a decision. That's the key at this point, is to make sure that we protect the yields and maintain what we have in the field. When I was looking at corn yield potential, a couple of things that we need to know. It could be very, very simple. We wanted to keep it as simple as possible, trying to do this in a few sections of the field, estimating number of ears per acre, number of kernels per year. With that, we can get a number of kernels per acre. And then after that is one of the last factors that is we call the unknown factor, because usually by the time that we do the estimates, we don't really know exactly how well that crop will finish until maturity. Mm-hmm. So in those cases, thinking about the weather conditions that we are expecting to maturity for that crop that is already in R4 or 5, which is basically really close to the end of the season, just a couple of weeks to what we call the maturity or the black layer. In those situations, we can be very accurate because we can just use 3 different range of numbers that they will be, if the conditions are excellent, what are the range of values of kernels per bushel? Usually it's around 75,000 to 80,000 kernels per bushel. If the conditions are really poor filling, so if we get to a rain filling in the next coming weeks that we turn to really heat and dry conditions, then that number will increase, which means that we have kernels that are smaller. And we will start measuring numbers that will be closer to 100,000 kernels per bushel. So let's go, if you want, Eric, just step by step.
Yes. And once again, with the wild card unknown being the kernels per bushel, working with those ranges that you mentioned there, you start with figuring the ears per acre, and that's the in-field sampling that is really at the core of this method.
Yeah. We are going through the fields, and usually we try to take at least 10 different spots in the field. The corn has been planted, which usually is the case, in our state at 30-inch row spacing. We are basically measuring 17.5 foot length within the row. And then depending on your plant density and your final number of plants in that field, in that area, in that row length, you will be counting usually between, if you go western Kansas in a low population, maybe 15 plants or maybe 12 plants, really, really low, going really west. And if you go to the more productive northeast, you probably will be pushing more there in that situation, so you probably will getting closer to 30, 34 plants. So let's say that we went to the field, we took 10 different spots in the field, and thinking about trying to capture the variability on that field. We look at 17.4 foot length areas, one row. We count the number of plants, and usually on average we can have 25 plants, 24, 22. So those numbers usually will reflect what is the plant density, the final plant density in those sections. 25 plants will refer to 25,000 plants per acre. Right. And then the same will be for the rest of the plants.
Because that 17.5 feet a row you're sampling is equal to 1/1000th of an acre. So you take that count times 1,000. That's what you're saying.
Exactly correct. And then let's say that we just look at, if we have 25 plants, we can just take an average of 10 plants in that area. Mm-hmm. We don't need to count everything. But if you look at all the counts on number of plants, we can get a very good estimate for that field. What is the overall plant density? Let's say that we have 22,000 plants per acre. If every one plant has 1 ear, that's 22,000 ears per acre. Okay, that's the first step. The second step is when we are moving to the kernels per year. I would say try to get 4 or 5 plants and just try to look at the years. And what we do is we are counting number of rows and number of kernels per row. And then if we have an average of 14 rows, let's say 27 kernels per row, so we have 378 kernels per year. And then with that, we can just do the same process for 4 or 5 years in each of those sections. And with that, we are getting a very good estimate of what is the kernel number per year.
And then you can simply do basic math here to come up with kernels per acre, multiply the ears per acre times the kernels per ear number that you come up with to arrive at that kernels per acre.
Exactly. And it's something that we can get a very close estimate. What will be the final number of kernels per acre? So if we have 22,500 ears per acre, 378 kernels per year, so our total number of kernels per acre is close to 8.5 million kernels per acre. Then is the magic number at the end. What we call the unknown. Right. The wild card, yeah, exactly. We can think about the idea of using the range that we discussed at the beginning. That is, if we have an excellent grain filling, that number will be between 75,000 to 80,000 kernels per bushel. If we expect really bad condition, bad weather, that we are expecting no precipitation, high temperatures again, in those situations, then we can start thinking about using the highest number, which is basically 100,000 kernels per bushel, give us a good idea of a situation with a poor grain filling. And I will give you an example. So if you go to, as we discussed before, with 8.5 million kernels per acre, if we go to a really bad grain filling, so we are thinking on using this higher number, 100,000 kernels per bushel. So our number of yield, it could be getting close, our estimate around 80 to 85 bushels per acre. If we use a much better condition for grain filling, and if we are thinking in a number that is probably 75 or 80,000 kernels per bushel, using the same number of kernels per acre, it will give us an estimate on yield that could be between 100 and 105 bushels per acre. So if you look at the difference between the two are around 20 or 25 bushels per acre. This gives you an idea of what your yields will be around, because we can use the worst and the best, and knowing that our yields will be around more or less those numbers, depending on how well that plant will go through the last couple of weeks until the end of the growing season.
It really is a simple and straightforward exercise, and if you'd like to see this formula in written form, it's in an Agronomy E-Update newsletter article that Ignacio put together here a couple of weeks back, posted on the 24th of July, so have a look at that at agronomy.ksu.edu. Thanks, as always, for taking the time, especially from your duties on the road today, Ignacio. We do appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Eric, for the invitation, as always.
Crop production and cropping systems specialist Ignacio Ciampitti of K-State Research and Extension on estimating corn yields at this point of the production season as we push ever closer toward crop maturity and then harvest. You're listening to Agriculture Today. More after this break over the K-State Radio Network.
With the shortage of primary care physicians, especially in rural areas, health education and disease prevention are vital. K-State Research and Extension programs address quality of life, personal development, and health behaviors across all life stages of all social economic groups. To learn more about health education, one of K-State Research and Extension's 5 grand challenges, visit www.ksre.ksu.edu.
Welcome back to the K-State Radio Network and Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. Before we get into today's agricultural news headlines, did want to set a few moments aside to fill you in on the details of that 2020 K-State Risk and Profit Conference coming up next week. It's all online, The theme will be the economics of agriculture during the COVID-19 pandemic, as you might expect, an ongoing discussion. How this will work, there will be daily sessions beginning this coming Monday, 2 sessions daily on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Friday. Those will run from noon until around 1:30 in the afternoon. On Thursday, 4 sessions. That'll start at 10:30 on Thursday morning. And here's how they'll line up. On Monday, the 10th, starting again at noon, K-State's Brian Coffey on hedging the sale of Kansas live cattle, a review of the past 10 years. He'll cover that recent research he conducted. Then K-State's Alan Featherstone on the agricultural finance situation currently. That's on Monday. Tuesday, August the 11th, then the first session will be presented by K-State's Brian Brigham. Brian on the macroeconomy, interest rates, and future inflation. Then a look at U.S. agri-food trade and COVID-19. K-State's Vincent Amanor Boadua, Kara Ross, and Catherine Ofori-Ba will have that session on Tuesday. Wednesday, starting at noon then, K-State's Michael Taylor and Chelsea Arnold on crop share or cash rent. How does risk affect the decision? The second session on Wednesday then by K-State's Jody Wendt and John Leatherman, an assessment of agricultural's contribution to the Kansas economy will be the topic of their session. Then the expanded sessions on Thursday the 13th, starting with the livestock market outlook at 10:30 in the morning by K-State's Glenn Tonzer, followed by that grain market outlook with K-State's Dan O'Brien. There'll be a break over the lunch hour for about a half an hour for an open chat with K-State agricultural economists and extension specialists. So if you want to go one-on-one with one of those specialists, you can do so during that part of the program on Thursday. It'll continue that afternoon with a look at non-traditional finance, an overview and trends of those options. Jenny Ift will have that presentation, the final session on Thursday. Projections of net farm income for 2020 and 2021. K-State's Greg Eibendahl will present that. Then the Risk and Profit Conference concludes on Friday with 2 sessions over the midday. Economic losses from ARC and PLC elections in the 2014 Farm Bill, an analysis by Nathan Hendricks and Mary Kurtzwell of K-State. That'll be the first session Friday the 2nd on the international grain market trends and factors with K-State's Dan O'Brien and Guy Allen. That is the lineup for the 2020 Risk and Profit Conference, virtually hosted by K-State next week. $30 registration covers all of the participation and more, but you need to get on that list as soon as possible. To do so, the quickest way, contact Rich Llewellyn at K-State, rvl@ksu.edu, rvl@ksu.edu, or go to agmanager.info for further information. U.S. agricultural exports in June fell to $9.9 billion, according to the USDA, the smallest since May of 2016, down nearly 4% from May, while imports eased to $11 billion, down 2.5% from May, setting a new monthly record trade deficit of $1.1 billion. This marks the second month in a row for a new record trade gap for the sector that has historically recorded trade surpluses on a monthly and an annual basis. June, the 4th month in a row with a trade deficit. It marked the 5th out of the last 6 months that this has happened. Well, encouraging the consumption of wheat-based foods is the primary charge of the Wheat Foods Council. That agency, sponsored by wheat producers and allied industry partners, has been increasingly progressive in its outreach efforts in recent years, and the council has doubled down on that during the complications of the pandemic. Marcia Boswell has more on this week's Kansas Wheat Scoop. Marcia?
The Wheat Foods Council shares expertise about all things wheat foods with health and nutrition practitioners, educators, the media, consumers, and anyone who, like us, loves the many wonderful foods made from wheat. Wheat producers in Kansas and across the country came together in 1972 to create the Wheat Foods Council as a national nonprofit organization to promote the category of wheat-based foods. Wheat Foods Council is a one-stop source for everything about wheat and wheat foods nutrition. The Wheat Foods Council includes grain producers, millers and bakers, baking suppliers, and life science companies. Due to COVID-19 and the unforeseen circumstances we all faced, Wheat Foods Council activities looked a little different this year. They usually hold a summer meeting to give members updates on activities. That took a slight change as they hosted the meeting virtually. According to Tim O'Connor, president of the Wheat Foods Council, it was a smart thing to do rather than having people travel and taking the risk of COVID-19. It was a different meeting than we had ever held, but it was a good meeting in terms of a concise agenda. Along with meetings being held online, they are also transitioning their content to be online as well. By doing this, they have seen a great change in activity and success. By creating short 1-minute videos with experts and infographic-style communications, they were able to get their point across in a very fun and productive way. Once they had created these videos, they then put them out on social media and were able to have tremendous pickup in return. As they grow their 800,000 viewers, their main target is personal trainers. Wheat Foods Council works with personal trainers and chefs that set menus for restaurant chains and major international companies. A major reason Wheat Foods Council chose to work with these influencers is because of their reach and followers, allowing them to impact many different people. They partnered with a culinary institute to educate the chefs and inspire new items on their menus. Personal trainers have a reach that works as a direct impact on the clients. The clients then share what they've been doing with their personal trainer to their network, whether it be friends or family. When they started this collaboration in 2015, most personal trainers did not realize the nutritional value of carbohydrates. But over the years, Wheat Foods Council has noticed a huge turnaround on that. O'Connor said, "We picked personal trainers as our influencer target because they were giving bad information that was reaching a lot of people, and we thought it was the right step to turn it around." As this fiscal year just got started, Wheat Foods Council is not slowing down with new ideas and hopes to bring in more traffic to the website. They plan on having a larger video category to help replace other activities they had planned on, but were not able to complete. The Wheat Foods Council continues to grow its reach and effectiveness and increase the value they bring to each member and to the wheat industry as a whole. For Kansas Wheat, I'm Marcia Boswell.
Thanks, Marcia, and we'll be back on Agriculture Today.
When you are in need of timely, reliable, and trusted information, K-State Research and Extension is here. Whether it's organizing people, information, or resources, they have the necessary tools. Community comes first for K-State Research and Extension. For more information and to connect with your county's extension agents, visit www.ksre.k-state.edu.
Rounding out this Agriculture Today, we'll pass along the latest on the Kansas agricultural weather scene, courtesy of Mary Knapp, climatologist with K-State Research and Extension, stopping over from the Weather Data Library here at the university. And how we're standing on moisture in Kansas, the latest numbers would suggest pretty well, you say.
Yes, for the week ending on Tuesday, August 4th, we were over 1.5 times our normal weekly rainfall. The western divisions weren't quite as wet as the central and eastern divisions, but the northwest saw generous rains, and they had missed out on some of the earlier ones. West central and southwest were not quite up to their normal, but they have also seen additional rains since this cutoff point on Tuesday. The east, even the southeast, actually got moisture. Problem in the southeast was that it was fairly spotty, so there would be one spot that got a nice downpour, and you go over to the other field and they missed out on it entirely. So again, that's an ongoing problem. When we look at the drought monitor, there weren't any changes in the west. There was enough rainfall to keep it from having any degradation, but not enough to make any improvements. The central corridor has been drought-free for most of the summer, and they continued in that vein. Northeast, we had actually excess moisture in that area. East Central also doing fairly well. In fact, what we saw was a erasure of the moderate drought in parts of East Central and South Central that were abutting the southeastern corner. So We did see some improvement in areas that got the more plentiful rainfall, but we're still having that persistent moderate drought in the southeastern corridor.
One thing for sure this past week, cooler temperatures as well, Mary. Very enjoyable to do just about anything outdoors.
Right. And actually the temperatures, while they were about 6 degrees cooler than normal for the period, were not so cold that they were going to create a lot of problems, particularly with the warm season crops like sorghum. Low temperatures, we did see some lows in the 50s, but still that was a very brief spate of that, so it didn't really interfere with the flowering and the heading of that sorghum crop, which is what's kind of on the critical point right now. Soybeans certainly enjoyed having the more moderate temperatures and those sporadic rains. So there are a lot of reports of fairly good development on the soybeans and on the sorghum crop. For the corn, most of the corn was already past pollination. It was in the grain fill stage. We've got some corn that's now in early dent. So they didn't benefit in those dry areas as much from the rains as the sorghum and soybeans did.
And the fact of it is that particularly sorghum could stand for accelerated growing degree units accumulating, and we may see that pick up the pace as the forecast goes.
Right. The forecast for next week is for a warmer than normal and a drier than normal period. Again, drier than normal doesn't mean that we're totally shutting off the rain, but when we look at the quantitative precip forecast, the wettest areas will be right along the Kansas-Missouri border, and that may be 3/4 of an inch for the 7-day period. In those parts of the state, you would typically expect something more on the neighborhood of an inch of moisture for the period. If you go further to the center and western parts of the state, the outlook for moisture is less. They're looking at maybe 1/10 of an inch to getting along the Colorado border, where they're calling for nothing at all. Again, that will be less than they typically expect, but thanks to the wet week we've had this week, it won't be completely devastating to the crops.
But you note that the monsoonal activity that often fuels our moisture in the western part of the state and even beyond has slowed down considerably. So that's something to watch.
Well, the monsoonal moisture has been pretty much non-existent for most of the desert southwest. And again, yes, it is definitely something that we watch because that tends to also be a feed of atmospheric moisture into the southwestern parts of Kansas. If we're not getting any moisture in the desert southwest, that cuts off one of the sources of that atmospheric moisture. We do have some wet soil profiles that can help feed the various instabilities that come through and create those pop-up thunderstorms that we see so often during our summers.
Let's finish by talking of the 3-month outlook taking us into the fall, and of great interest, of course, to those planting crops this fall, such as winter wheat. What's that telling us, Mary?
Well, unfortunately, the 3-month outlook is not as favorable as the August outlook. And basically what they're calling for is warmer and drier than normal conditions. There will be an update to that outlook in 2 weeks, and we'll see what their forecast comes up with at that point. Basically, what they're watching is the chance for a La Nina to develop. When we have a La Nina in Kansas, we tend to have a hotter and drier than normal fall and generally a milder winter. So we'll have to see if it continues on the trajectory that they're currently looking at, which gives us about a 60% chance of a La Nina developing by the late fall, early winter.
And it's very important to monitor just how late into the fall and winter that would actually come together.
Right. The later the onset for that La Nina, the less impact it has in our region. So if it manages to linger in the neutral phase through our fall, that would be much more encouraging to us here in Kansas.
Well, the La Nina watch will be unfolding here very soon. And Mary, thanks for coming over. We appreciate your time.
Thanks, Eric.
Climatologist Mary Knapp, K-State Research and Extension, Mike Side right here. And we thank you as well for tuning in. Please be back with us here on Monday. Until then, Eric Atkinson here, bidding you a good weekend for Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.